Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the rest of the world. Welcome to this week's edition of Beyond Tomorrow, a program where we talk all things environment, the climate change and conservation. Today we're talking about a critical subject, just energy transition. You might have heard about it, but we want to get to understand what this animal really is all about and what's Zimbabwe's position regards this just energy transition. And to talk about this, we've got the team from Action Aid, Sir Augustin, Elvis in the building. How are you, sir?
I'm all right, thank you, sir.
Great to have you on the show. Just give us your role at Action Aid, what it is you do before we get into the nitty-gritties.
All right, thank you. My name is Elvis Augustin. I work with Action Aid Zimbabwe. I'm the climate justice lead there. Basically, what we are doing is we are fighting the war from all ends. At local level, we are promoting the alternatives, be it around agriculture, even energy issues. But also, we are advocating and lobbying for this just transition.
What is this animal called just transition? People in climate change, you love talking about terminology, mitigation, adaptation, you name it. Tell us, what is this thing called just energy transition?
All right, thank you. So the issue about the just energy transition really is about a movement away from the major drivers of climate change, things that produce greenhouse gas emissions. And from research, it has been known that fossil fuel use, probably through energy generation, and even industrial agriculture does that, there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that are released, and these are the major or primary causes of climate change. So when we then start talking about that transition, we are saying we need to start moving away from using dirty fuels towards renewable energy. So that movement, that process of moving from the dirty non-renewable energy sources to the cleaner renewable ones. So that is the transition. And it being just means basically it's fair. There is equity, there is involvement, there's participation of all involved.
Is Zimbabwe in that space of moving from your dirty energy, you're talking about coal, for instance? We recently, commissioned 7 and 8 Wange. We've got abundant supply of coal in the country. How are we faring as a country?
Well, yes, there's no yes or good or right answer as it regards to where we are in Zimbabwe, but I can safely say we are in the conversation, and I can safely say Zimbabwe is for the transition. It's important to understand that it's not abrupt. We mean we are not going to stop now using coal-powered fuels, etc. But in principle, we have agreed that we need to move. And there are various things that have been done that I believe in terms of a position, particularly in relation to the core processes. Zimbabwe has a position that kind of supports that. But what's critical is how then the movement is, the process in itself. But in terms of a position, there is general agreement that we need to move away from the dirty energy.
Lovely. That we've set the context now. Let's look at the elephant in the room, funding.
Yes.
For you to move from the dirty fuel, it means new infrastructure is needed to accommodate your wind, your solar, your hydros, you name them. There's always been that gap. The global north is not releasing funds to the global south. The pledge of 100 billion is not being met. Now we've got different animals being thrown around. You're talking about your carbon credits. Some are saying, look, developing nations are releasing more greenhouse gases as they try to industrialize. How do you balance the gap now, funding-wise?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that there is a climate justice element to it. The global north really needs to actually fund this adaptation, these changes that we are calling for. They really need to do that. And I think as we move forward, you spoke of the 100 billion. I think now it's going into trillions.
Yeah.
But we won't stop lobbying and advocating to ensure that these funds actually seep through and come through to the global south, Zimbabwe included. But I think also there is a role that government needs to play in terms of publicly financing that transition, or some of the adaptation strategies that we want to actually implement country-wise and as Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what steps can be taken by countries that are developing? Because it's one thing to put it on a document to say, that's the direction we want to take. And we know, because we've seen a lot of projects, we've seen a lot of investments coming through for the solar sector, for instance. Recently, we had the floating solar deal that's been tabled to be put on Lake Kariba. Tell us about the steps that are feasible for developing nations with the little funding that they might source.
I think some of the steps, actually, as we transition, really need to look at a proper analysis of how that movement needs to happen. It speaks to research and development, looking at the resources that we have. What does it take for Zimbabwe to move away from coal into this wind-powered or solar-powered, be it whatever solution that we have, right? There has to be research and development.
Okay.
An analysis around what are the effects around jobs, people who worked in those particular industries, right? So the environment, what are the environmental implications of these particular changes? So all these things need to be taken into account, as well as ensuring the people living in areas. Remember, as we transition, there are certain critical minerals that will enable us to move to solar. We talk about lithium and these other critical transition minerals. Host communities that hold these resources need to be consulted, need to be part of the process. So they need to be in the conversation as well. We speak about, as we transition, what happens to the jobs and the skills that people that become redundant, kind of, right? So we need to reskill.
When you look at it from a global perspective, I know countries in the, in the developed spaces, your global north, have started doing the transitions. How has it been like? How have they managed to make Taku, who was working in that thermal powered station, relevant in an era where we are going smart?
I think with proper funding support and research, capacity building plans, that's very possible. And that's what they have done.
Okay.
There's a lot of finance towards it, so that no one really loses as they transition.
Okay.
So it's important to then start the processes around what does it look like for Zimbabwe? Which jobs are likely to come to an end, and what do we do? How many people are we talking about? So these are conversations that then need to start to happen before actually people start to transition into just transition and cleaner energy.
Whilst we talk about solar as one of the ways to go about it, wind has been talked about in Zimbabwe. When you listen to people from Ministry of Energy, Zera, for instance, they will tell you that there's been locations that have been cited. They're waiting for investors to inject. How quick can we get these deals going? And from your research and work with various institutions, including the government, what have been some of the hurdles there in terms of luring in your private players, your foreign direct investors?
Right. So you realize that as we speak about the just transition, the just energy transition, it's not all about profit. There are social elements to it. How do we ensure the rights of people are respected as we transition? So as much as there is need to ensure that the economics bit of it makes sense, I think then government comes in to create policies that ensure that investors do come in and find it possible to invest. But also government in itself, remember government has a lot of power in terms of influencing the trajectory of our economies. It can actually invest through those public funds into this research, into this renewable energy. It's still a feasible option to take for government.
How is Africa faring in terms of the transition? We know South Africa has been doing quite a lot in terms of, changing their thermal stations into smarter spaces. We know of Egypt soon after COP27. There was a lot of injection of funds there from your Americas, and they're doing quite well. But Africa as a whole, what's the atmosphere like in terms of the transition?
I would like to say from an African perspective as a region, we're not faring very well because that movement requires a lot of financing, like you earlier highlighted, and that financing has not come. So you realize a lot of African countries then have to depend on those resources like the coal deposits and actually then depend on exporting critical minerals as raw materials rather than adding value to them. So the value that they extract from those minerals that they have is low. So in terms of the transition, I would say we are not doing very well. And if you look at the global stock take that was done in relation to the core processes, it's testament to that as Africa and as a world as well, we are not doing very well in terms of limiting and reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. So we're not doing very well.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. When you speak to the permanent secretaries here, your director climate change, Vashakata, he's been here and he's talking about the issue of loans versus grants and all that. I think the funding gap needs to be addressed, and even as the nation and the other, nations go into COP29, which has been dubbed a financial COP, it's critical to have these things tabled. As Action Aid, what are you doing? You called action. I love that. What action are you taking?
All right. I think the COP space is where the power lies, it looks like, and it's where the decisions are going to be made. And there are processes in which people can then feed into. So as Action Aid, I think one of the key things that we have been doing is we have a campaign that's running that we call Fund Our Future campaign. And basically it looks at, one, encouraging global financial institutions to reduce or stop funding dirty fuels and non-renewables. They should invest more in the renewables, in the alternatives that we are speaking to, because they really need to be supported financially, like you spoke earlier. And I think we are also encouraging young people to actually get to understand what this means. You'll understand, like you earlier highlighted, that most people are not conversant with this topic. So climate education is critical in ensuring that people get to be a part of the conversation. I think that's critical. As well as, I think basically is to be in that space and amplify the voices that are likely to be affected and that are being affected by climate change and by the transition.
Is solar something we can really leverage off as a nation, or we definitely need to complement it with other things? Because we see, like I said, in Egypt, they're doing very well. Dubai, doing very well.
Yeah, I think for Zimbabwe, what's realistic is an energy mix.
Okay.
Mixing these things. But the overall effect is we are reducing the emissions.
Yeah.
Right. But globally, I think we also did a report last year, a flagship report that we did. And one of the findings was, if there's enough investment in the renewables, the potential from renewable energy, be it solar, wind, and these other renewable energy sources that we have, they can meet the global needs for energy. So I think it's then critical to start investing adequately. Remember, for us to get to these fuels that are coal efficient, it's been a number of years in terms of research and development and developing those fuels. So if we do the same to the renewable energy, I'm sure as we transition, and by the time we actually say probably we are completely off the fossil fuels, we'll have renewable energy that meets our needs globally and as a country as well.
Interesting. Earlier you mentioned the critical component, which is climate justice.
Yes.
Because in the transition, as a commercial entity, I'm looking for profit, but you said it's not always about profit. But if I invest 100 million to get 100 megawatts, I'm looking for profit. How do you balance the scales?
Yeah, I think putting people over profit is important. The interest of the people is very important. It doesn't always have to be money first. And remember, the justice element comes in as well, because the current effects that we are going through as a globe and as Zimbabwe as well from climate change are because of years of industrial activity from the global north. And countries in the global south are suffering the most in terms of the droughts, the recurrent droughts, the cyclones. And we don't have the capacity to actually kind of cope, and every year we are getting these floods and cyclones. And poor people are suffering. So that's where the social justice element comes in. So as much as you'll understand that the billionaires keep making billions, but people are still getting poorer and poorer. The ordinary people.
Yeah.
Regardless of where they are sitting in the world, they might be sitting on tons and tons and millions of tons of lithium and this. But they still can't adapt.
True.
So that's where the justice element comes in. We really need to make sure that the vulnerable people are represented and taken care of.
Okay. In conclusion, let's talk about innovation in terms of unlocking funding. We, as the countries in the global south, can no longer keep waiting for the rain from the global north. It's not coming. What best practices can African nations, Zimbabwe in particular, carry out to ensure that they unlock funding that allows the nation to start transitioning?
I think what's critical is leverage on the resources that we have.
Okay.
That's one major one, the public finances that we have, and really ensure that we leverage on the power that we now hold, because the resources that we now have in terms of lithium and these critical minerals that are essential for us to transition, they give us leverage to actually be able to get tech that we might need to actually be able to transition. But I think governments really need to invest so that we, as we export whatever we export, there's value in that. We're not exporting minerals. We're not actually add value and value add what we're doing, and you know. But the other things is really coming up with very progressive tax regimes, tax systems. I know it's probably a different topic altogether, but if these people are coming in to invest, what is the nature of the policies or the contracts that we are signing with them? We can't be giving them very long tax holidays and they come in, they pollute and they go.
Yeah.
The polluter needs to pay, and those progressive tax regimes that then need to come in as sources of this critical funding as we transition. Any
exciting projects that you're working on currently and in the future?
Oh, yes. So like I said, we are also at the forefront of the effects of climate change, and we are working with communities to adapt their ways of doing food production through promotion of agroecology. So we have a number of demo sites and nutritional gardens that we are supporting in terms of with information. How then do you, in the absence of fertilizers, in the absence of chemicals, how do you still grow food and maintain a bit of profitability?
Okay.
Because one of the key issues with climate change is it has led to food insecurity for people in the rural areas who depend on rain-fed agriculture. Yeah. So, and I think one of the things that we are also ensuring is trying to do is work in spaces where mining towns, to ensure that at least people are aware of the environment, their rights are protected in those spaces.
True.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, unfortunately, because of our time, we have to cut it short there. We will be looking forward to joining you in the field and seeing some of these projects that you are doing, exciting stuff, and we want to see how you're playing your part to ensure that the nation remains food secure. Mukoma Elvis, thank you so much for coming through. Wish you all the best as you march on with the rest of the team at Action Aid. Viewers, right now we're going to leave you watching some of the highlights from the recently held COP29, a pre-COP29 technical planning meeting, which was held on Tuesday right here in the capital, Harare. This has been Beyond Tomorrow. I'm your host, Taku Chiambakwe.